Good morning, chat. How are you guys doing? I hope you guys are having a great day. It's pretty toasty out. I think I might go for a bike ride today. I'm a little bit of a cyclist, so I might go and do some of that. But I hope you guys are having a good day. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about jet engines, or more, I guess, propulsion, right? Specifically what bypass air does, because I thought that would be an interesting topic because it's a little bit, maybe not convoluted, but it's something that you don't, always know a lot about, I think. So let's just talk a little bit about what bypass air is and what it does for certain engines. So bypass air, by definition, is air that goes around an actual gas turbine engine, right? So you'll generally see in, especially commercial aircraft, you'll see a large fan at the front. In the middle, you're not going to be able to see it from the front, but in the middle there is a gas turbine, and around it there is a space for bypass air. Now, you'd think, why do engines need to have air go through the engine but pass around the compressor, the combustion chamber, and the exhaust, and not provide any thrust? Right? You'd be thinking that. And I can do another video explaining a little bit more about what gas turbines themselves are, because that'd be an interesting video. But funny thing is, it actually does provide a lot of thrust. So let's just talk about the benefits that bypass air does. So first, just to really quick clarify, a gas turbine that has bypass air going through it is called a turbofan. That is one of the more common types of jet engines these days. But what that bypass air does is two things primarily, or three things, I guess. One, contrary to what you would think, it does give an engine more thrust, especially in a lot of commercial aircraft that have high bypass ratios. And I'll get into what a bypass ratio is in a little bit, but the thrust is created by air going through the engine and being accelerated, which then is still exhausted out the back, not being combusted into actual explosive thrust, but it's being accelerated and still pushing along the aircraft. So it does that. And in some cases, it can provide up to 80% of the thrust, depending on the phase of flight, which is really interesting. So that's one of the main reasons, one of the very important reasons, especially for aircraft with high bypass ratios. Now, to talk a little bit about bypass ratios, what a bypass ratio, simply put, is the ratio of air that is going through the turbine and the air that is going through a bypass lane, I guess, if you want to call it that. So generally, high bypass engines you're going to see are going to be commercial aircraft. That's why they're so wide. It's not the actual turbine that's that big, it's the bypass air around it. It has a very high bypass ratio. While you have low bypass ratio engines, which are most commonly the turbofans that you'll see on fighter jets, they do have bypass air for the reasons that will be explained, but they also have that very similar turbojet design in the middle that allows them to use afterburners, have very high thrust, and still be able to fight in many situations, right? Now, the second reason that bypass air is really useful is engine cooling, right? Because it's not going through a compressor, it's not increasing friction, it's not being combusted, right? That bypass air. So what it does is, it stays cool. And if you're at high altitudes, right, you're at cruising altitude, it's going to be very cool, and it is touching and going around the engine, and it's taking heat from the mechanical parts of it away from the engine. So it does a very good job, and that's something you wouldn't see in the likes of like a turbojet, where there's no bypass air. It has the turbine and then the exhaust. There's nothing that's keeping it from cooling itself. So that's one thing. It's very, very helpful for keeping engines running at full power for a long time without overheating, which was a legitimate issue in a lot of piston engine aircraft, right? And also another reason that bypass air is very useful is noise reduction, because that's another thing. The bypass air is being accelerated, but it isn't going at such high speeds as the air that's being exhausted out of the turbine, which, naturally, if you've heard a fighter jet, then you know how ridiculously loud they are. Because when they're at full afterburner or mill power or something like that, most of the power is coming from the turbine inside, and it's extremely loud. but for most aircraft that aren't at full power or they have a high bypass ratio, that sound is being blocked by the slower air that is surrounding that, which means that you have very quiet engines. A good example would be the Boeing 787 Dreamliner is known for having a very quiet turbofan because of the bypass air. And also, I will say there is a little bit of, some of that comes from the efficiency of the turbine, but a lot of it is the bypass air. Those are like the three main things that are really useful. Another thing I'll say is efficiency, because that's a really good one. We think because it's not this air is being sped up through not through mechanical forces, then that means that you are creating more thrust without actually using that much more energy, only by the energy of you being propelled forwards, which is very beneficial. Which means at certain points in flight, the very high bypass ratio turbofans can potentially be as efficient as a turboprop or something, right? So you can think of it that way. So yeah, those are the benefits of bypass air, and that's what they do. What I think is really interesting, and the part that I think is cool, is how it's been implemented into fighter jets, right? Because when you think of a bypass ratio, you should generally be thinking about airliners and that kind of thing, because they have very wide engines. But we all know that jet engines are much narrower, but they still do have bypass air. Because interesting enough, it's almost like a perfect combination, and you see a lot of this in a lot of bombers, even some airliners and fighter jets that have low bypass ratios. What it does is, because these aircraft are going so much faster, or generally are going faster than an airliner, the air is speeding them up, and it is providing a decent amount of thrust, but not as much as you would imagine compared to the actual turbine inside. But what it really does is it really open up the ability for fighters to become more of a versatile and long-term thing in the future, because we look at early fighters back in late 1940s, 1950s, and we see that they had very short engine lives. They had a very short range, not a lot of fuel, because they weren't able to go that far, and because they just weren't very efficient because of the turbofan system. And turbofans do a lot to alleviate that with putting less load on the actual turbine and giving it some bypass air to create thrust, make it more efficient at certain phases of flight, which really is beneficial. And I think without that, we would be looking at a lot different scene for fighters. For bypass air, that's really all I had. I just thought it'd be an interesting little thing to talk about. Now, I do plan, and I want to talk about more engine types, because that'd be cool. I want to talk about, in the future, I think it'd be nice to talk about ramjets, scramjets, the props, of course, pulse jets, so we can see, I'll see what we can do. But if you'd like to hear more about engines and that kind of stuff, please let me know. But without further ado, I hope you guys have a nice day. Go outside, get some sun. This video is being recorded right before the Tuesday video is being uploaded. So I hope you guys have a nice day, and chat type 1.